Yeah, how will I tell if we're live? I don't know if I can.
Tell what?
I'm not sure I would be able to tell if we're live.
We are live and it looks beautiful.
Okay. So I guess you tell me when we have 10 or so people in, and then I'll start the little video here to.
So Paul, you are starting, sorry.
Yeah, I decided I thought we need another happy birthday thing. We had this sort of like salsa sounding thing. Now we need something more electronic. So, and it only eats up like a minute. So. Because we might as well celebrate the birthday again. That's what I mean. Part of it is celebrating, right? So let's celebrate.
Yeah, it looks like we have George Dinwiddie. I think I saw Nicole Wilker, Meenakshi, a bunch of names, familiar names.
Cool. Well, let's just get some music going while people are arriving. So we'll have some happy birthday music to celebrate further, and we'll celebrate with some 80s stuff, not truly 80s stuff, 80s sound stuff.
Welcome everyone. I am Anju Baraya. I'm co-facilitating this session along with my colleagues, Jesse and Seraphe. Speaker for this session is Paul Poos. Paul is an IT executive coach with Excella. Paul has coached numerous organizations in the private and public sector. As an active community member, he has founded several Agile groups, a government-centric Agile conference, and serves as the chair for Agile Alliance Agile Coach Camp Initiative. Here you go, Paul. The floor is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I really appreciate it. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a sort of a game for around my talk. So I've gamified this. This is sort of an experiment where instead of using any type of presentation tool, we're going to use a platform designed for playing card games. As you probably realize when you're coming into the session, we're going to do a tarot card reading. So I have some tarot cards. Way we're going to work this is I'm going to deal some cards out. I'll deal out 4. There are 12 in the deck. I do not expect to get through all 12. Then I'm going to invite somebody to post into chat the number of that they would like me to select out of the images. And you might want to let me sort of pass my mouse over them because it'll make it larger so you can see the image a little bit. And you'll choose an image in that. Whoever's first gets it. I will put that card into the discard stack, and then I will tell my story about that. And then we'll turn around and let you ask any questions through the Q&A, where my lovely facilitators will help me understand what's coming my way. I'll answer questions for 4 to 5 minutes. Then I'll probably see if there's any burning questions that are still left. And then if there are not, we will move on to the next. I'll put another card out, and then we'll go ahead and go through another round where people will post in the numbers. So hopefully that's somewhat clear to everybody about how we're going to do that. So let's start off and see what the first deal gives us. All right. So I would like to invite people to go ahead and post the number they want. And whoever's watching that out of the 3 of you, I can't remember who it was, tell me what number the first person selected. Either chat is really quiet, which is really unusual.
So
Yeah, yeah.
People are clear. You have to pick a number between 1, 2, 3, 4, whichever card you feel like. And whoever puts the number out there in the Q&A chat window, Paul will go ahead and explain the story behind it.
It looks like we got the number. Laura put in the number 3.
Number 3. All right. Very good. So this happens to be 2 statues. It's a Dali painting, and they're sort of in ruins. So Dali took some ruins and sort of turned them into things. So let's chat a little bit about what that comes from. So that's actually this comes from my coaching experience. And this particular one deals with the fact that in 2013 or so, I helped run for a large government organization. This is probably the only one I won't talk about the name of the organization because they happen to also be an Excel client. But working with them, we brought everybody together for a workshop to co-create the vision of what they wanted their transformation to look like and start figuring out strategies and stuff of actually how that would work. In that session, they looked at the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities, the risks that they had going forward, and that was really, really cool. And then they started going to strategies, and as you would expect with some organizations that have only had a little bit of training around Agile and not really a lot of anything else yet, not very much experience, they sort of fell back to a little bit of traditional stuff. So in this case, the CIO, who was the one that brought everybody together, decided, well, we're just going to stop here. I'm going to sort of dictate how not only the vision, but how we're going to go about this. The downside to that is, of course, that really sort of worked against them from a buy-in standpoint, right? So they didn't really have the buy-in of his people anymore. So that really sort of killed it a bit. And so, and people started leaving a bit after that, right? Because they were not a lot apart. This kind of went against the idea of meeting people where they are and trying to help them along, because it's kind of like saying, hey, this is my way or the highway kind of thing. And so some people were leaving because they didn't even fully understand where they were going. And so they just started leaving because of that. Other people left, because they weren't really getting a say in how it was being implemented. And, as I went through, that intrinsic motivation that people had to really want to try this out sort of like burned out. It just sort of fizzled. What it started becoming were people that were just trying to follow Agile processes or practices that were being put in place just to be compliant, right? And also there's a lot of politicking, like who could show off that their group was being more Agile or their team was being more Agile than others, between vendors that were going out there, as well as between different parts of that particular the division that was under the CIO, right? So who can show that they're more Agile? So as they're losing more and more people, it just started, deteriorating. So now what also happened is they started bringing in other people that could spout out those practices and processes really, really well. And again, that you would think that would get you something better, but it actually wound up being more, these were people that were coming in with a command and control mindset and not letting the team sort of run themselves. So the flip side of that is in 2019, when I was working with this client again, this time as part of Excella being a vendor delivering software, I'm coaching several different teams in our thing. We find that the dev team is getting all this stuff of not being allowed to work the way that you would think that, in the self-organization, the self-management that we had talked about earlier, particularly in Jim York's session. He had some stuff where self-managing is now in part of the Scrum guide, and that's exactly what they wanted us to follow was Scrum. That was sort of going away. They were basically imposing the way they wanted to work. It just happened to be they were imposing an Agile process. So that meant, like, if we found a way of delivering faster, there was no incentive to trying to do that per se, other than, hey, it makes our company look good. So we'd use it for a politicking standpoint, not necessarily trying to make that work any better. So with that, that's sort of the story of when you as an individual don't sort of co-create visions with the rest of your people, it sort of causes deterioration of your transformation. So I'd like to open it up for questions now. If anybody has any questions about what happened or anything like that.
Again, folks, you'll have to enter the question in the Q&A session chat. I don't see any question.
Okay, I guess that one was easy enough. Let's flip over another card.
I see one that just popped up.
Okay,
Is that
before
a
I flip over
question?
the card, then let's go ahead and answer the question.
Do you see it, Anju?
Nope. So is it in Q&A chat?
Yes. So the question is, are there any specific warning signs or inflection points to look for?
Yeah, so I think some warning signs that you can look for is so some of the language that you start hearing, right? So some of the language I would hear, like there was a assistant division chief that one of the teams that sort of worked underneath of him, you know, the CIO asked the question of that team, would Kanban be more appropriate than Scrum? I see you're proposing Scrum. Or would it something more like embedding Kanban inside of Scrum help you? And so when we went back and we started chatting about it, that assistant division chief basically was saying, we're not going to do any training wheels. They're going full blown, you know, Kanban, right? Where because he was viewing Scrum, you know, Scrumban, Kanban embedded inside of Scrum as training wheels. That was his perception. It was not some. It was he viewed the question as either being Scrum or Kanban. And when we started having discussions of maybe having the one embedded in the other might help the team a little bit more, he didn't want to have any part of that. So that was, you know, it was kind of like, you know, not doing that. And he's doing it also reflecting that he's trying to do that because, you know, the CIO, the way he asked the question when we were proposing Scrum and he said, wouldn't Kanban be more appropriate? Then he's really looking for the answer Kanban. So basically he's guessing at what the CIO wanted as the answer to do for compliance purposes. So that kind of language, you'll hear it around the water coolers and in the teams and so forth. So that's what you have to look for. You listen for that kind of stuff. Those are probably your best early warning signs. And to be honest with you, that's where you need to have somebody that's running around being an independent observer, you know, having coaches running around and just hearing this kind of stuff, because they're not going to say that to the CIO directly again, right? They're just going to come back with the answer that they think he wants to hear and try to have a stronger rationale. So I'd say that's the biggest warning signal you'll have.
Thanks, Bob. I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So ready to move on.
All right, let's flip over the next card. All right. Who would like to go for that one? So post the number that you want, whoever wants to select any of the 4 cards that are currently in display.
Pick a number, put it in the chat. I see number 1.
Number 1.
Yep.
Great. So this is all about launching teams, right? So, again, I've worked with several different agencies. Just large organization is probably one where it really was the first one that I started helping lots and lots of teams doing this. And so the way we found was actually running workshops to launch your teams and leaving some space and time for that to happen. You know, we always talk about like a sprint 0 to help you get infrastructure and stuff like that up, but never do we talk about like setting aside that same amount of time to let a team get all of their working agreements, talk with their stakeholders, find out what's the most important thing for getting running. And where I have seen teams spend that time getting it together with sets of workshops, maybe infused with tiny bits of learning workshops as well. So the teams are learning just in time, as well as setting up things like their backlog and so forth. When they do that, they actually wind up with a much stronger team. And at Census, for example, I'll give you one example. I had a product owner that came to me and he was like, wow, you really need to get going. We need to deliver something by 6 months from now in order to be able to meet a certain window for testing for the whole decennial census. They were making a component for the decennial census. And I asked him, just hold on a bit. We want to make sure we understand the direction we're going and so forth. And so it took us about 2 weeks. We're not spending every hour of those 2 weeks in a workshop, because they would have little pieces of homework to go and do in between. And at the end of those 2 weeks, when they actually started doing the work and they finished the first sprint and the team was already gelled and working well together, the product owner said, I wouldn't have thought that spending 2 weeks kind of getting that stuff arranged and things like that would have been beneficial. But I really see now, I'm seeing working software. And, in the 2010 census, when I sort of had the same thing, we didn't do Agile, it was sort of a waterfall, but it was the interface from the business to the IT group. I thought we worked well then, but I would have never imagined having working software in 2 weeks and have been working so well with the team on a day-to-day basis. That really helped. It also helped a lot when they started having little bits of difficulty every now and then. They knew they can come together and sort of work through those problems much more easily than if they had, not spent that time. Then they would have probably started falling into a little bit of us versus them type of thing. So that was one of the things. So some of the stuff that goes in these workshops, like I mentioned, like working agreements, definitions of done, definitions of ready if you need them, the different ceremonies that you plan on having. If we were looking back at Alistair and we looked at, Crystal, this would have been like, hey, we might have done some of our blitz planning to understand the overall backlog type thing that we want to deal with. We might have the vision of the application that we're dealing with, the stakeholders and how we want to work with those stakeholders. How will we work with security? What are some of their needs? Those kinds of things. Maybe what's the most important thing about this project? Is it most important to be on time, or is it most important to deliver scope and therefore a date that we're arbitrarily setting can slip? So those are the types of things that you might go through. So I'll open it up for questions.
Folks, any questions? Nope.
All righty. Let's put another card out and flip it over. So we picked up a Japanese shrine. All right. So somebody will post the number that interests them.
Number 4.
Number 4. So this African court here kind of represents a coaching coalition. So looking back at a large organization where we had coaches coming from lots of different people. So I worked underneath the CIO along with a couple other coaches. There were couple coaches that worked for QA at the time. And then the various contracting or vendors, however you want to look at, they had some coaches that were a part of, helping their teams out. And this started out sort of by pairing a lot. So I might pair, for example, if I were going out, I might pair with a coach with QA, and we'd help set up a team and running some of those workshops, and then help monitor them together on how where are they struggling? What kind of assistance do their Scrum Masters need? Is there training that their product owner might need? Whatever those things would be, that would be sort of the coaching stuff that we'd be doing. Or it might be teaming with one of the vendor coaches and actually doing the same thing. So which was great. Then we started adding some other coaches into the mix. Some other coaches got hired by QA. More vendor coaches started showing up. There was a large program also that we started sort of grouping in with this. And so we started wanting to look at systemic things that were going across and get alignment. So we created a coaching alliance where we all sort of agreed on, this is how we're going to operate. Here's how we're going to regularly reflect on what we're seeing in the organization, and then take a look at systemic problems and then try to figure out systemic ways of approaching that. So we might theme the types of things we're going to look at for a period of time. Like, hey, it looks like this month we're going to focus in on product ownership and how can we improve product ownership, because we're seeing that product ownership problems across multiple teams at this particular time. So we want to try to help that out. Or maybe it's in trying to decrease lead time or reduce WIP, those kinds of things. So we'd start theming some of the work we do. Now, we wouldn't ignore teams that were seeing things that were different, but we also knew we were trying to handle systemic issues as well. And so that would allow us to actually create and come to agreement on with this. One other thing we started doing as this larger coaching alliance is we would, a group of us that mostly work for the CIO, we would look at the overall SDLC, so stuff not just in the development area, but stuff that decision-making that occurred before deciding whether, is this a project we're even going to want to do? Is this a product we want to build? And also the types of things that would go into maintenance and stuff afterwards, because they still sort of had a view that once a release kind of got to done, then yeah, we're going off to maintenance. And when you look at government appropriations, that's sort of how the money works as well. So we were trying to figure out how can we make that better. And as we found improvements, we would work with the other coaches to help those improvements get instilled into the various teams, because a lot of the teams were doing maintenance type work. And as we found things that were places that they could improve, we wanted to make sure that they were aware of that. So that's sort of the story around how a coaching alliance and doing pair coaching can kind of help you out.
Paul, I see a question from Laura. The question is, did that start organically? How did you get across vendor buying?
Yeah, that's a great. So the pair coaching started up fairly soon after we started coaching. After the organization, that I was brought in, we started just seeing that, hey, you've got some coaches in QA. Well, let's pair up. Oh, here's a few coaches over here in this particular contractor. Well, let's pair up, right? And that way we can be a little more effective. And it also helped, since quote unquote, I'm being hired and representing the government interests, same way with the QA coaches, it helped a little bit in making sure that we could be fair about that. It was once we started adding in other coaches, like that we had one coach that was from like IV&V, for example, that we started noticing a little bit of things where things could get out of sync, and we weren't getting the alignment. So that became a little bit more organic. We fortunately had a coach that had done this particular thing that joined, and he was the one that suggested doing that. And so I thought that was really great. He happened to be joining the QA group. And so he, being the new person on the team, he sort of facilitated that, right? So, knowing that we might all be bringing baggage in, he didn't have any baggage. So that made it wonderful. And essentially it's sort of like doing a team launch with a set of coaches, creating this coaching alliance, figuring out what working agreements we want to work to, how do we set alignment, how often do we reflect on how the organization's doing, how often do we reflect as how the coaches are performing as well. So where do people need help also? So I hope that answered the question.
Can I ask you a question? Did you guys all, the coaching alliance together, did it help the executive levels of the different areas be more connected and work together better?
I'd say partially, yes. So, I mean, obviously, depending on the executive you're talking about, they may or may not be so directly involved with the teams that we were dealing with. At the time I was there, like the infrastructure folks weren't somebody we were directly coaching. In fact, I found myself coaching the contracting folks more than I found myself coaching the infrastructure folks. So there were sometimes demands on the infrastructure, and yet I'm not sure there was any impetus in trying to reach out to them from, any of the executives. So that we were trying to bridge gaps where they were, but there's also, it was difficult for us to bridge where those where there wasn't a desire for it, right? You can't really coach somebody if they're not also reaching out and seeing a need. And it probably did not help that particular exec that ran infrastructure, for example, was on the West Coast, where everybody else was on, co-located here on the East Coast. So that probably also influenced that. If they were just even, streets away, we would make an effort of, if they wanted to meet with us, we'd meet with us. So, go with them and talk with them and help them understand. Because I remember going to and talking with their security folks, which were in a different building, or we might work more with a large program, which was in a different building. So.
Thank you, Paul. So I don't see any other question. Maybe we are ready for your next number picking.
All right, so let's pull another card over and flip that over. All right, there's our new card. I'll just remind you of the old cards. What number will we get today?
2.
2. Somebody wants to learn how 2 might be in their future. Jesse, were you waiting for somebody to select a persistence of memory? So, persistence of memory by Dolly. It's obviously melting clocks. And what I want to leave you with is we hear a lot about, at least I've heard, where Agile can save you money, and I would say I never tell anybody that Agile will save money. However, I do want to tell you where it did melt costs away by delivering value early. All right, so this is when I was working with USDA Rural Development. So USDA is U.S. Department of Agriculture, right? So we had this is where an estimate, at the end looked very, very weird, right? So what we were doing, and we were using Scrum here in Rural Development, and we were building a tracking system for the Office of General Counsel. So we were working in a regular cadence and delivering value, working with the product owner from OJC and their stakeholders to prioritize things and so forth. So the team that was working in my branch delivering that, was pretty small, not a big system or anything, but they're working on a good cadence. And then about 2 weeks, 2 sprints out, the product owner calls me up and says, "I think we're going to finish this early." And it says, "Oh, really? Tell me how that's getting there." Well, I'm seeing all the value we need being delivered because we found things that we didn't need after we saw stuff being developed. I'm seeing the value being delivered early. And it looks like after, a couple sprints, we're going to have everything done, and the software is not buggy or anything like that. And we would like to get it in production and go ahead and start using it. And I said, wow, that's kind of cool. And so we did at about the end of that 2 weeks, we confirmed in a review, yep, that's everything that we see that we need for what we need to do. We'll come back to you if we find that, after we've been using it for a while, we want other features. I'm like, that's great. So, we finish up, we've used about 60% of the money. As the branch chief, I took the money off of contract. Now, I will say my contractor wasn't too crazy about that at that particular moment, but I took it off contract. It's not my money, so I gave it back to OGC to let them do what they need to do with it. And then, here's the thing that I thought was really cool. So, we not only did we save some money in that particular circumstance, but that became a thing for the reputation for our branch and for that particular contractor for delivering. So, when we became sort of like a preferred vendor, that our particular branch, they had a choice of either coming to my small branch or a really large group in St. Louis that did most of the development and maintenance for the organization. And as I was there, we wound up with about 20, when I looked at the applications, we had about 25% of the people of what that large group was, and yet we had about 40% of the portfolio that we were developing and maintaining. So that we sort of became preferred vendor because projects like that where you deliver value early, and their view is that we saved them money as well, because they when we worked out sort of the estimate, which was based on historical data that we had pulled out from other times we had done that, we by focusing on prioritization and stuff, we were able to deliver early. And so I really hats off to the Scrum Master and the team that was delivering that. By the way, my Scrum Masters were all government employees, so that was really good. Our product owners were always drawn from the business, which was always good. So I highly encourage that's what you do. So that's the sort of story behind that one. Any questions?
I see one comment from Laura. That's a great story. Now turning that story value into a contract incentive for vendors would be the next step.
Sure. I mean, it just needs to be careful and balanced, right? So if you're going to put this into a contract as an incentive to be mindful of that, you know, that's a little bit around schedule. You probably want to make sure that you have also some stuff around quality. And I would also want some stuff around morale, to be honest with you, because, you know, we were talking about early indicators. Morale is a great indicator of when you're going to have problems. If the team's morale is tanking, you're probably going to see quality problems or delivery problems. So any other questions?
No.
All right, let's see. Looks like we got at least time for another round. Drag that over. So our new one is a Trojan horse. Still got our shrine, still got our girl wrapped in a blanket reading, and these guys up on a balcony. So who would like to select a number? What number do we get?
3.
3.
Mary. Yeah. 3 from Anne Mary.
Oh, Anne Marie. I figured you'd be here. All right. And you know, this seems like one that you'd actually want to choose too. So this particular one with this, you know, a woman sitting in a blanket with a cat and reading is all about getting comfortable with learning, right? So you're getting all nice and warm and snuggly with learning through reading. And this goes back to a time, again, when I was with USDA. So if we rewind all the way to, you know, 2009, I look at this sort of like the, you know, impact of, you know, learning a lot. You know, in this particular, I'm sorry, not 2009, 2011. It was the impact of 2008 to 2009. So if you remember 2008, 2009, we had a recession here in the U.S. in particular. I think it sort of got worldwide, but a lot of it was, you know, we had a big recession. And of course, when you have a recession, companies start cranking back on R&D, right? That's an area of funding that's not going to make them money immediately. So at the time, I was working for the Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Pesticide Programs. You know, we're trying to understand. You know, a coworker and I, we're actually just sort of interested in understanding how can we apply this thing called a business canvas and understand the business model of EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs, because we're a little different than all the other offices. Office of Pesticide Programs, the pesticide registrants, which represent manufacturers, actually send us money to process their ability to make and sell pesticides. And also and we also charge them a maintenance fee for continuing to do that on an annual basis. So the initial registration fee is where we make most of our money, and then the maintenance fees pay for a little bit of ongoing costs. We don't get very much appropriation money from Congress in Office of Pesticide Programs compared to like Office of Water or Office of Air or Solid Waste. Those are all appropriations type money. So we're very much like a company. We're taking in fees. If we take in, if the company pays extra and we agree to take that extra, then we're committing to a certain schedule of delivering things by that amount. So rewind, we're trying to just understand our business a little bit better to figure out how our IT organization can support them a bit better. So we built a business canvas. And if you're curious about this, it comes from a book called Business Modeling Generation. It's a really good book, kind of weirdly shaped, but it's got this canvas. So we start filling this in. And one of the things that's sort of a toolkit that you can do once you have your canvas built, and you know your value proposition, you know what customer segments you're dealing with, or in our case, constituent segments. You know where your revenue streams, you know your costs, you know your partners, all of that. The thing you can start doing is taking a look at, hey, what is the environment around us? What are the market forces that are happening? What are the political decisions that are being made and stuff that are changing how things are working? So this is where we started, us going back to that recession. This is where we started thinking about, well, we just had a recession of, and we're starting to come out of that, but what we know kind of what happens to companies with these business cycles. So my colleague and I, we sort of hypothesized that, we could see, because of the delay in the system of when they made the decision of not doing as much R&D, we might not see as much registration fees coming in. So we went to our IT director and said, hey, I think we ought to try to figure out a way of testing if this is going to be true, because there could be a huge impact, not only to us in IT, because there'll be less money coming in paying for systems to be updated or created or maintained, but it also might mean, less people doing the work that are our customers, internal customers and stuff that we're dealing with. This could have a big impact on our organization. And our IT director in this case said, nah, probably not going to happen to us. We're in good shape. About 2 or 3 weeks later, the Office of Pesticides program director calls everybody in for an all hands. And he basically says, we're on target to have the least amount of money coming into our organization since we were founded in 1983. So that just kind of goes to show you that if you can do something where you are creating a model and the model gives you information that you might, all models are wrong, some are useful, and they tell you where to test things. So this was telling us we should have gone out and had a few conversations with companies to see, hey, what's your R&D line looking like from 2 years ago? What's your pesticides coming in? And it would have been nicer, of course, to have had this model, this canvas put together like a few years back, so that then you're really testing that on a more regular basis, like maybe every 6 months you're going out and doing these little surveys or queries, or even just doing reading, applying the news kind of thing, and seeing what that would do for you. But to me, this is all about learning and learning at a macro level, really. And for my colleague and I, for the type of work we're doing, sort of buried in the trenches and helping build and maintain IT systems, this was very eye-opening for us in understanding sort of how the business of the Office of Pesticide Programs ran, which was really also beneficial because we knew sort of how we fit into it. So with that, I guess I will turn it over for questions.
Don't see any question yet. Nope, I think
Okay.
we can.
Shall I think we might have time enough for one more card.
Yes.
All right, Escher. Everybody loves an Escher. So we've got Japanese shrine, a Trojan horse, Escher, and some folks in an Italian court on a balcony.
Who wants to pick up a card?
Don't be shy. You only have to put a number in the Q&A chat.
Looks like we have a 4 in the chat from Rochelle.
Okay. Cool. Well, this is one I get to talk a little bit about my entire career on. So we always talk about servant leadership. We hear a lot about servant leadership and stuff like that. And I guess ever since, so I have a Navy background. I went into the Navy as an officer and flew in the back of aircraft. And in the Navy, you have a ground job that you come back to when you're a flyer type, whether you're a pilot or an NFO like I was. So I'm a young lieutenant, junior grade. Had my first little promotion that occurred basically as I arrived in the squadron, and I was put in charge of a senior chief who probably had like almost 20 years in, a first class who's probably got a decade in or so, and then an airman, not an airman, a seaman third class who's at least got 2, 3, 4 years in. So here are some enlisted folks, and I'm working in the group I'm in charge of is maintenance admin. I don't know anything about maintenance admin. I'm still learning about how the squadron is working. So who am I to tell them how to do their job? Yet I saw many of my peers start telling people how to do their job. So I basically took on this aspect of trying to be a servant leader. And, I've kind of let that carry through, particularly whenever I was put in charge of folks, of trying to figure out, hey, when I walk into something, what should I be doing? Well, the first thing I want to do is just observe how people are working. What's the work system sort of look like, right? So another example, at Defense Information Systems Agency, I'm rolling in as a senior lieutenant now from that squadron into running the system programmers. We call them system admins now, for VAX VMS and AOS VS, which are Digital Equipment Corporation computers and Data General computers. Both of those companies are out of business now. So, and basically, I don't know anything about this stuff yet. So my job is to sort of observe and see how they do their work and how we help our customers and work out that. And then whenever I saw an issue occurring, rather than me coming in and tell them this is what we're going to do, I would ask them, here's the problem I'm seeing. How do we want to fix that? Right? That to me is like a servant leader. And then if there was impediments in a way, I would look for getting rid of impediments. I would also look for different ways of helping people get new training and stuff that would make them better at whatever they were trying to do, or to help them grow to the next level if that was their interest. So I would look for that kind of stuff, right? Try to help them grow, either sideways, because maybe there might be a system program that wants to learn a little bit more about AOS VS, and that might, they're associated with VAX VMS and they want to learn about the other operating system. Or as another example, we had people that were putting in a network and then running Unix servers inside of DISA as well, that I was quote unquote put in charge of as a project manager. Well, there's the person that's running cabling is not really finding that a fruitful job, right? So let's figure out ways that they can get, learn a little bit about other parts of the job, and how to maybe learn a little bit about system administration or something that's on the Unix server, so they could pair up a bit with a Unix person and learn a little bit about that. Likewise, having the Unix person learn a little bit about, hey, what's this cabling thing, even though it's mundane, let me lend a hand. So just encouraging them to help each other out. They also learned a lot about, how they could basically self-organize a bit. So we're running a little behind on cabling. Okay, well, I think we're going to help out in that area, right? Or maybe I'd flip it around. There might be some mundane things that in Unix administration that are very essential that cabler has learned, so we can let that person do that job. And so that could do that. Learning a lot about your people and what makes them tick, I think is really huge for servant leadership. You really can't serve them if you really don't know about what their needs for growth and, and success and happiness are. So that's something that I've sort of followed throughout the career. It's great being a coach, because now my job is to help managers unlock that for themselves. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. We probably have time for a few questions, and maybe we'll end on the happy birthday song again.
Folks, go ahead and enter questions if you have any. Please remember to provide your feedback in the Whova app.
Yes, please.
For the session. No questions.
All right. So not that we're going to get a chance to do another card, but just to entice people that might want to have a conversation later, I'm going to create a group in the community where we can go in and actually create a meeting if we want to. We can talk about any more cards and that you want to talk about, and of the ones that are out that are still available, or we can just chat about other ones that maybe you've thought of questions of earlier cards that you want to ask about and stuff like that. And sort of looking at the thing, we probably have less than a minute, so I'm not going to try to kick off happy birthday again. So, but we need to do jazz hands for a happy birthday. So.
Thank you, Paul, for the great session. And thanks to the audience for providing your inputs.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great sessions lined up. Please join us for the sessions. See you guys around. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And don't miss the raffle.
And don't miss the raffle. That's true.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Paul.